Hello, everybody. Welcome along to the Event Industry News podcast with me, James Dickson, wishing you all a very good morning, afternoon, or evening, whenever or wherever you tune into today's podcast from. And on today's podcast, it's part 2 of our Tramlines special. Hopefully, everybody that tunes in today has already listened to part 1 with Timm Cleasby, the operations director for the Tramlines Festival, talking all things sort of, operations, as you may have guessed, from the festival. But if you've listened to part 1 and you've tuned into some of the things that Timm mentioned about the community aspects, the involvement of local independent businesses, the location of the festival being in a beautiful park in Hillsborough in the north side of Sheffield, but in very much an urban location, you'll understand why today's sort of follow-up episode of part 2 of our Tramlines special is so important. Because I'm delighted to say that thanks to the team at Sheffield City Council, we're going to be joined today by Councillor Richard Williams. Councillor Richard Williams is from Sheffield City Council and is joining the podcast today to help talk about and maybe highlight some of the wider benefits that an event like Tramlines brings to the city of Sheffield. Councillor Richard Williams, good morning and welcome to the Event Industry News podcast.
Good morning, James, and thank you for having me today.
Not a problem at all, and thanks for joining us out of the blocks, as it were, on a first thing on a Monday morning. Particularly in the sort of the lovely sort of warm and maybe a bit muggy weather that we're having at the moment here in South Yorkshire. And I'm not too far away from you. I'm in South Yorkshire. I'm a Barnsley based person. I don't sound it, but I've had the good fortune of living in Barnsley and being based in South Yorkshire for 26 years, as it will be in September this year. So I very much consider myself an adopted Yorkshireman, and this is very much home territory for me in terms of talking about Tramlines, and it's an event that I've visited in its various guises as an audience member over the years. Richard, I mentioned that we've already spoken to Timm Cleasby about the production aspects of it, but there's all sorts of things that we could discuss today from a city perspective. And to kick things off, I did make some notes this morning, and the first thing I wanted to ask really is how important it is to the city's sort of ongoing efforts. Sheffield is a city that has a rich history as an industrial city. It's the steel city, but there's been decades of regeneration and growth within the city to transform it. Inevitably, as industry has declined, if we can say that, and new businesses and new types of business have come into the city. So how important is an event like Tramlines to the sort of ongoing efforts to raise the profile and maintain the profile of the city itself?
Good question. Tramlines is really very important to Sheffield. It's not a coincidence that it's an outdoor festival because we are the outdoor city. I mean, yes, we're still the steel city, but we're still very much, we like to think ourselves as the greenest city in the country. And it's highly fitting, therefore, that one of our biggest events of the year, if not the biggest event of the year, is set in an outdoor setting.
Absolutely, and that ties in perfectly, serendipitously, if you may, with some of the things that Timm was saying. For a city that has such a rich industrial heritage, many people won't be aware of just how much fabulous green space there is, which is one of the things that really does make Sheffield unique as a city.
One of my roles in the council is actually chair of the Charities Trustees Subcommittee. A number of our major city parks were donated to the residents of Sheffield back in the day by J.G. Graves and amongst others, and it's very important, the heritage of our charity parks, which are, although they're obviously in different locations in the city, they are very much destinations in their own right, and people will travel all over the city to get to them. And Hillsborough is one of the key ones.
And of course, one thing that we didn't actually ask outright or touch on sort of in a direct fashion with Timm was the naming of the festival. It is called Tramlines, and for those who are not aware or maybe not familiar with Sheffield as a city, it's very very much because of its iconic tram system that's become synonymous in many respects with the city itself.
Yes, I mean, and it's one of the benefits of Hillsborough Park as a venue is the fact that the tram literally runs alongside it, so it's great for getting people to the festival and helps get them back at the end of the day's performances. Sheffield is, ironically, the Victorians had more tram lines down than we have today, but there are talks about possibly expanding it again in the future. But the trams are synonymous with Sheffield.
Absolutely. In terms of the relationship with the organisers of Tramlines, this is an event that's grown from being, you call it sort of a fringe event in the sense that, originally took place in pubs, in bars, in fixed venues in the city centre, and has grown in some respects very organically to become what it is today. And I'm hoping that what you're going to say is that in line with that, the relationship and the working relationship between Sheffield City Council and the organiser of the festival has also grown as well, in terms of the personal relationships and the operational relationships. Is that something that you've been witness to?
Very much. I mean, as you said, it started in 2009 as a free to entry festival based around Devonshire Park, Devonshire Green, and the local pubs and some of the venues. It was a multi-venue festival at the time, and its success has just continued to grow and grow and grow. And in the end, actually, it had to move from the city centre because it was just so popular. And so it moved to Hillsborough in, I think, 2018. But at the same time, the council wanted to work with the organisers to ensure that it was still in the city as well. And hence the Fringe, as we call it now, has developed and expanded. And I think this year's Fringe was the biggest we've had. And it dovetailed very nicely with the actual main Tramlines event in Hillsborough Park. In terms of the council working with the tramline organisers, this was a very important year because it's the first of a new long-term agreement we have with them, which will mean that Tramlines is going to be at Hillsborough for quite some time to come.
Excellent, and great to hear that that longevity, and that agreement has been reached, because ultimately, I suppose for everybody, then that provides a bit of stability, confidence in knowing where it's going to be, and with that, the planning and everything that goes along with running an annual event of that size maybe just becomes, maybe not easier, but just a little bit better to manage, because you can plan the long-term sort of aspects of it.
Yes, I mean, Tim, I'm sure will have covered this, but the planning for 2025 started well before the 2024 event even was happening. I'm not an expert in the music industry, but the way these things pan out, you can't just start 1 year and work on it for 12 months. You need more than 12 months.
No, absolutely. It is very much something Tim touched on, not just from the operational and the logistics and the infrastructure and other stuff that's happening in a city like that. There's the artist aspects that he touched on, where, the artists that you might want to book, their diaries are booked up, 2, 3, 4 years in advance sometimes. So there's all sorts of things that have to be considered. And one thing, from an operational and a city-wide perspective, you've got that undoubtedly a huge economic boost to the city as a whole, because you've got the fringe events in the city centre as well as the main event taking place outside of the city centre in Hillsborough Park, and all of those businesses that can benefit economically from that. Not just that, the public transport networks, food and beverage outlets, pubs, but local shops, amenities, all of those things are benefiting. But is there a careful balancing act that has to take place to make sure that benefits are derived for the businesses that can benefit from it, but that businesses that don't necessarily benefit directly are not impacted in a negative way?
Yeah, the balance is exactly the right phrase. We know that for some of the residents in around Hillsborough, it's inconvenience, it's disruption, and the organisers, and I'm sure Tim would have touched on this again, go out of their way to try and balance that out by giving things to the community, providing ticketing for the local residents, and the idea is that the whole of Sheffield benefits from this event, and that's why the Fringe is so important. I think it's estimated that just over the weekend, an extra almost £4 million worth of money comes into the city,
Wow.
which can only benefit as a whole. And it's hotels, it's restaurants, it's bars, coffee shops.
Yeah, absolutely. Not just the nighttime economy, because, as a festival of that size, but without camping with that, that many other festivals have. I suppose that there is a huge benefit there to people coming for the entire weekend and requiring some form of accommodation, which doesn't just benefit the immediate economy around Hillsborough, but they're going to probably stay in locations, I guess, all around the city.
Absolutely, yes. I mean, I think it's estimated around about 17-18% of people who attend the festival live in S6, which is the local area around Hillsborough and Stannington and places like that. But no, we do attract a lot of people in from the rest of South Yorkshire, from the rest of the country. And in fact, internationally, we get people who come over. Tramlines is now recognised as an international event.
And absolutely it is. And in line with international event goes, sort of international eyes and wider eyes looking on at what's happening, which I guess must play a part as well. In terms of ongoing communications and dialogue with local businesses, how does that manifest itself on a sort of a year-round basis? Is there are there sort of specialist committees or people who are tasked with actually engaging with the local businesses year-round in respect of Tramlines as an event?
Yeah, I mean, Timm and his team go out of their way to have an ongoing dialogue with local residents, with local businesses. Local councillors are very much involved as well. I don't represent Hillsborough; I represent Stannington Ward, just up the hill. But it's very important, and I think I've seen some of the vox pops that have been going around, and the positive comments that are coming from local residents about this year's event, particularly. It's really very pleasing. No doubt, we were very fortunate this year that the weather was absolutely spot on.
Yes,
in fact,
it was. Yeah.
In classic British style, one or two people were complaining it was a bit too warm, but
you can't have it always, particularly after last year, and
yes,
and the weather was, to put it mildly, not great at all last year, beset with sort of what you may call classic British festival conditions, which presents far bigger challenges than a bit of warm weather, I'm sure, presents.
Exactly.
And I guess in line with that as well, does the city have to gear itself up in a slightly different way, depending on the weather, depending on, if it is going to be, warm and dry? Is the festival sold out well in advance, or do you maybe anticipate more people coming out for things like the Fringe event in the city centre if the weather's going to be good?
The main event is sold out well in advance. And so we know how many people are going to be in and out and each day, and that's under control. And Timm and his team go out of the way to make sure that's done. From a council's perspective, safety is our key priority.
Sure.
And there's on-site medical tent with doctors and medical people there, and we get regular reports about if there's any issues. The other hand, the Fringe side, it's what turns up, who turns up on the day, and clearly on the weekend we just had, it was very busy because the weather was so good. And the nice thing about the Fringe is you can pop down for an hour, you can pop down, make a day of it if you want, go shopping in the morning and then go and hear some music in the afternoon. But it's very much people come in and out. I mean, I was down there myself at the Fringe, and you could just see people coming in and out all day. That's a nice thing. That's actually the nice thing about it.
No, it is, and I can testify that as somebody who's been to the Fringe, on more than one occasion. It's local for me. I live in Barnsley. I can hop on a train. I can be in the city centre of Sheffield in 20 minutes on the train from Barnsley. It's the transport links into the city are great from all over the region, and further afield as well. Indeed, don't forget it's mainline train links from Manchester. So the ability to just sort of pop in, have a couple of hours in an afternoon when it is nice weather, I suppose is one of the major benefits of running an urban, based festival. It's a luxury that a lot of festivals don't have, is the ability to have that Fringe element and to sort of, make it attractive to people who, even when the main festival is sold out. One thing. Go on, sorry, Richard.
I'd say that's really what the whole of Tramlines is about, and I think the Fringe rounds off what is a tremendous event for Sheffield, because it's this idea that you can have no plans, wake up in the morning, you've got no plans to do anything, and you thought, oh, I'll just stroll down to to the Fringe, Tramline Fringe, for a couple of hours, and I'll go and have a coffee there, and I might stay because it's a nice day and go and have a meal in the evening. So all that benefits the economy. It really brings Sheffield to life. It reinforces our heritage, our music heritage, as much as anything else. And I mean, the weekend of Tramlines, the city centre was buzzing.
Yeah,
and it's really good. Yeah,
it is. Just touching on something you mentioned about the long-term agreement to retain the festival in Hillsborough Park. Even though the festival itself only takes place over a single weekend out of it, in the context of an entire year, that's a short period of time. But given the massive economic impact and the positive impact that it has in the community, are there infrastructure plans in terms of regeneration of the area, in terms of transport links, restoration of buildings, things like that? How wide is the impact felt of a fairly short-term event?
well, it's although the festival is from a Friday to a Sunday, there is a 2-week build, and there's obviously they're taking the whole thing apart. I was talking to Tim about this, and it's as if you've moved house. It's always easier to unload a van than load a van.
Yeah.
So the takedown is always easier than the build. But that's important in terms of. I mean, Sheffield is going through a major redevelopment. We have the Heart of the City projects, a lot of building, a lot of interest and inward investment into the city, and the fact we have tramlines only adds to that.
Yeah, it does. Looking at some of these local independent businesses, what is the feedback that you've had directly from the businesses in terms of their impact? And I'm not just talking about economic impact. That's obviously important for them to survive as businesses. Is that they do feel an economic benefit from tramlines, but in terms of their the exposure that they get from people who may not have seen a particular local business before. What's some of the feedback that you get from business people in and around the area?
It's very positive. I think for a lot of people, they may not be aware of the businesses in and around Hillsborough and Hillsborough Park. These are showcased through our Little Hillsborough messaging. And what it means is that you may not, I mean, you can live in a city and not go to certain parts of it ever.
Sure.
But Hillsborough it's very eclectic place. It's got lots of lovely little businesses running out of it, and people discover them when they come to Tramlines, and they keep coming back. And I think the majority of businesses really welcome having Tramlines there. Yes, it can be disruptive, but they know that it's going to be there. They know when it's happening. I know some businesses actually decide just to not open for the weekend, but and that's their choice, obviously. But clearly, it announces Hillsborough and the local businesses to the wider community.
And it would be sort of remiss of me not to maybe highlight other events that take place in the city. Well, I've got the opportunity with you on the podcast today. Tramlines is obviously vital. It's a big event, and as we've highlighted, it draws a lot of footfall and business into the city. But what it also does is highlights the city itself and potentially other events that are going off there. And this is a city that's rich in its musical heritage and its cultural heritage. There's all sorts of stuff happening. You could go into Sheffield city centre on any given weekend, and there'll be something happening in a museum or in a venue or out in the streets itself. So I'm guessing that Tramlines also has a wider impact on other events that are taking place in the city.
Yeah, well, it keeps Sheffield up in people's minds. I mean, Sheffield has something happening every day. We have two great football teams. I'm not going to declare my interest there for obvious reasons.
That's a big can of worms there, Richard.
Yes, it is, absolutely. We've got a basketball team. We've got ice hockey team who are very successful. A few years ago, we had the semi-final of the Women's Euros at Bramall Lane, which was, the biggest attendance at a women's football match outside of Wembley. something is always happening in Sheffield.
Yeah, and it's good to see events coming back as well to places like the Don Valley Bowl. Which
Yeah.
the Don Valley area was became almost synonymous with a lot of big events and music events, particularly in the 80s and the 90s. The old athletic stadium that was there, had artists like the Rolling Stones and U2 on their tours. Back in the 90s and even into the into the 2000s. And it's obviously the athletic stadium and the Don Valley Stadium as it was is no longer there, but the Don Valley Bowl area is another sort of area that has been known for music in the past, and there's events coming back to there. So we're sort of seeing all sorts of development and growth in other areas of the city, not just city centre.
Yeah, absolutely. The Olympic Legacy Park, where the Sheffield Eagles play. I must mention them, otherwise I will be kicked. And we're signing up to a new deal with our leisure centres and including the arena, and we're looking to get some really top line acts to come in going forward. Les Miserables is coming to Sheffield in, I think it's November, which will be very exciting at the arena. And it's just we're looking to improve and impress and increase what people can do in Sheffield.
One thing I'd love to ask is, and you may or may not be able to answer this depending on your contact with other councillors from other regions, but what's your take on other cities and towns indeed who maybe don't see the benefits of having events on? The events industry, whether it's business events, conferences, trade shows, music events, festivals, arts, cultural events, brings so much to a local area, and it strikes me that Sheffield City Council has a very, very positive outlook on that, in terms of what they bring and the relationships that the council has with the organisers of these events. It would be fair to say, I think, that the other cities and towns maybe don't have the same type of attitude towards that. Have you had any experience of talking to other regions about their approaches to it, and maybe positioning Sheffield as a sort of a leader in that train of thought?
Well, I haven't spoken specifically to other councils about this, but you can see just from your own experience, places like Manchester, Leeds, are taken a leaf out of the direction that London as a city has given. What we're seeing, and it's not surprising, that what happens in a city centre has changed dramatically over the last 20 odd years. Back in the day, city centres were a combination of businesses and retail. Now, clearly, with the growth of online retailing, that's had to change. And really, cities have got to make their own minds up what they're going to do with their city centres. In Sheffield, we've done a lot of investment in getting people to come back and live in the cities. We've got two massive universities, both right in the city centre. And what we're now doing is looking at giving people who live in the city centre things to do. And that involves going to entertaining, eating, socialising, getting involved. And I think that's the way all cities have to go.
Yeah, absolutely. And not just cities, I should give a shout out to my own sort of hometown, as it were, Barnsley, which is, when I came to the town in 1998, it was a typical sort of grey, 1950s, 60s prefab concrete jungle that in the last decade has undergone complete transformation, is unrecognisable, the town centre area now, because it recognized that it needed to make itself a destination, somewhere for people to come. And when I was walking through there on Friday afternoon in glorious summer sunshine, the open space that's now forms the center of the town, it was just full of families. It's the summer holidays for schools. There are water features there in the town center with kids splashing in the water and having a great time, and food and beverage outlets around there that flank it so that people can get food and drinks. And that's certainly, it's not something that's unique just to the town that I live in, but it's something that certainly a lot of towns are going down that route, like you said, because of the shift in attitudes, and events in the town here have become a huge part of its town centre offering? How do you bring people into that as a destination where you have to put something on to bring them in and experience all of those things? And it is something that I guess in this region has become fairly common to see that sort of development, particularly given our industrial heritage in the region.
Yeah, and I think it's the way it had to go. I think the past is the past, and heritage is critically important, but we have to evolve and move on. And I think Sheffield, particularly, I could really only talk about Sheffield, but we've done some exciting things over the last few years, and we'll continue to do so.
Absolutely.
And I'm sure your hometown of Barnsley is in a similar situation.
Absolutely. We've been talking today on the Event Industry News podcast to Councillor Richard Williams from Sheffield City Council from the Stannington. Would it be classed as Stannington Ward?
Yes, Stannington Ward, which is it's by far the prettiest ward in the city, because a large proportion of it is actually in the Peak District and is rural. But it comes down to Mayland Bridge, which is very close to Hillsborough Park, and in fact. Without getting too technical, a recent survey of our secondary school in Stannington, something like 80% of the youngsters who go to that school say they frequent Hillsborough Park because it's a very exciting place to go, especially when especially over the Tramlines weekend.
Absolutely. It's been a pleasure talking to you, Richard, and thanks very much for giving up a little bit of time on at the start of a busy week. It's a Monday morning that we're recording this, and I never underestimate the value of people's time. And thanks very much indeed for taking a little bit of time out of the day to have a chat with us.
You're welcome. Thank you, James.
Just a couple of mentions before we wrap up today's episode. If you are watching today's episode on eventindustrynews.com, thank you very much for tuning in. Please don't forget that whilst you're on the website, you can check out the latest news, features and special supplements, things like the sustainable event buyer's guide. If you're looking at taking a more sustainable approach to the way that you plan and manage your events, please do check out the sustainable event buyer's guide. It no doubt offer you some tips, insights, suppliers, people who are doing things maybe a little bit differently, and offering you some guidance, because it's a bit of a minefield, I think, for most event organisers now, the subject of sustainability. So do check out all of the information that's available on the website in that particular respect. Don't forget that Event Tech Live and Event Sustainability Live return to Excel London in November this year. Please do check out their websites, eventtechlive.com and eventsustainabilitylive.com. You can register for either of those events and gain access to both of those, run by the team at Event Industry News. And finally, if you've watched this today on the website but not yet subscribed to the audio versions of the podcast, please do so. Please go to wherever you get your podcasts from and make sure that you subscribe. You may have started your journey today by listening to us. If you've done that, thank you very much. Please don't forget to go in the opposite direction and check out the website, which brings us nicely to the end of today's episode. My thanks again from Sheffield City Council to Councillor Richard Williams for talking to us in part 2 of this Tramlines special. Our thanks again to Timm Cleasby, the Operations Director for Tramlines Festival, for taking the time out and chatting to us in part 1 of this special. Richard, good luck to the city. Good luck to the ongoing efforts that surround the running of Tramlines. Great to hear that long-term agreement has been secured, and best of luck for the future.
Thank you very much.
And thanks to everybody for tuning in to today's episode. We will see you again on the Event Industry News podcast. Goodbye.